Okay, it worked. We're recording.
Ooh.
Um, so we'll get started. So, Troy, I'll let you take it away. Quick introduction about Troy. I've known him for years. He first met him because he was an organizer of a local meetup group. I've used him for inspections myself and with clients, and I've been able to learn some really interesting things from him over time as an inspector. He's also an investor himself, so he kind of has that perspective. He works with a lot of investors. And yeah, I shared an email with one of the nuggets that he gave us, or he gave me in the past. But I will turn it over to you, Troy, and let you just share whatever you have. And if anyone has questions along the way, go ahead and either put them in the chat. Actually, that's probably the best way to go. Go ahead and put them in the chat, and then Troy can get to them. So, all right. All you, Troy.
Cool. Well, thanks, Gideon. Let me see what's going on here. Like Gideon said, I'm an inspector and an investor. Lanika Inspection Services. I retired from the restaurant industry when my real estate passive income replaced my salary and bonuses. I passed the California broker's exam, but I decided not to become a broker because that's not my personality. But I wanted to be involved in real estate daily, so I decided I enjoyed solving the puzzles of a house, which is why I became an investor or inspector. 90% of our inspections are for investors, so flippers, landlords, both on the buy and sell side. We used to do a lot of the Seattle RRIO inspections, but we don't do that anymore. But I stay up to date on that. So when I do inspections in Seattle for landlords, we can. I understand that the reports are a negotiation tool as well as a safety checklist. So I understand the real estate side and the investing side of inspections. And as my system crashes out here. So I've been inspecting for, no, don't cancel, no. If I lose you, it's because my system sucks. Hang on, oh, there it goes.
Sorry to hear that.
Oh.
You had mentioned something RRIO a moment ago.
Yeah, the Seattle Rental Registration Inspection Ordinance.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's just an inspection checklist that the city puts out that says to what you should do to have a safe home. A lot of it's if you're not doing it, like one of the check marks that's a fail is dirt floors. If you're doing that, you don't deserve to own rentals. But then there's dumb things like a crack in a window will fail the inspection. So make sure that you get registered so that you don't get fined, especially in today's climate. Here we go. All right, so now we just hired a new inspector. Kelsey is now doing inspections. So there are two of us, and we can do twice as many inspections as we did before. And there's my little Fiat, and I like to say big reports, teeny tiny car. All right, so one of the biggest things to think about when we're scheduling inspections is how weather plays into it. Weather is pretty important. If we've got snow or sunshine, it's not going to be as thorough of a report as when we're in Seattle and it's raining. It's just a matter of what's happening to the system at the time, the roof system, the foundation system. If it's frozen, you're not going to see any leaks if there's no water in the system on a sunny, bright day. there's going to be no leaks to find. We can look for signs, but we can't look for anything that is indicative of what's actually happening. Mhm.
So would you say there's like maybe an extra risk associated if it's winterized because you can't inspect it in the same way?
Yeah, especially if a house is winterized, it's harder to inspect all the systems. The plumbing's been flushed, the water heater's off, most of the breakers are off if it's been winterized. But even with snow, you can't get up on the roof. You can't inspect any roof damage. In the fall, if there's a lot of leaves on the roof, you can't really see what's going on. If there's stuff hiding the foundation around the home, like snow or leaves or overgrown, it's just important things to know on how the quality is. But if it's raining, we're going to find 90% of the big water related issues. So most damage comes from the rain. Inspections are best when it's actually raining, which is why it's great to be here in Seattle, because we can locate those problems quickly. Grade. So as you're approaching a home, the grade of the home is going to tell you a lot about the problems that you're going to have. If it's flat, you're probably going to be looking at a better inspection report and less problems than if you have a giant mountain that's flushing water down at your foundation. And then it's not common around here or it wasn't common around here for French drains to be installed around houses, especially these 1960s double split level homes. They almost always need to have some sort of French drain installed around them because they'll leak in the basement and you'll get the musty smells. And sometimes you can mitigate that with sealing the foundation wall, but the best way is a French drain. So if you're doing a rehab, if you're going down to studs, if you're doing all the hard work, you should think about doing a French drain either internally or externally if it can fit into your investment profile.
And can you just explain what a French drain is as well?
A French drain, this middle image here, that's basically just a pipe in the ground with perforations, holes drilled into it to collect rainwater. It's got looser soil at the top and is packed down into more stronger and more compacted soil so that all the water runs into that pipe and away from the home and the foundation.
Got it.
And then specifically in Seattle, what we see a lot are these garages that have the negative slope. They go down into the garage underneath the house. Those should always have garage drains out in front of them, just to cut into the cement with a drain pipe that takes it off from the side, because all that water is coming down. So if you see sandbags or towels or wood pieces in front of a garage door, usually indicates that there's going to be water entry into the garage. And if it's getting into the garage, it's probably sitting there because no one goes out to mop up their garage or squeegee their garage. And that could be could start organic growth problems. It could cause foundation problems. It could damage the sill plate. So these negative sloped inspection driveways that we see in Seattle are a big problem, and should indicate to clients that is something that should be fixed and can be an expensive fix because you're playing with concrete. You gotta jackhammer the concrete and put in the drains and all that good stuff. So
is there a way to know that it's there? Like you just see basically some drains right in front of the garage.
Yeah.
And then it's all good.
Yeah, if there's drains already there on a negative slope, then it's all good. In more modern builds, they require the drains at the bottom of the negative slope, uh, and they're just like little metal grates that run across the driveway.
Awesome.
So also along with grade, uh, the 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 slope, it should slope, the dirt should slope away from the house, very slightly to prevent water from running up. And sometimes, especially when we get down to like Kent and Puyallup areas, you'll see little dips uh, in the landscaping that indicate that they've sloped the grade away from the house. Um, so those are things to keep in mind. But, all right.
By the way,
If,
if anyone else has any questions, feel free to just jump in. There's only a few of us, so I don't think we'll bump into each other.
yeah. If the ground slips to the home, expensive damage is very likely. All this water is going underneath the house in a negative grade and causing damage to the foundation. So that's where we get expensive repairs. Foundations, not all the damage is equal. If we get a vertical crack like this, even though when we're looking at cracks, we're looking at the width of the cracks, and we're looking at to see if there's any sharp pieces in the cracks. The sharp pieces would indicate that there's recent movement and it hasn't eroded away into softer concrete. And then the width of the crack.
So basically, sorry,
Yeah,
are you saying basically if you see a chunk, like if you see like some extra cracks around that crack, and there's like basically a piece that you could probably like almost like jimmy out, then that means that like, hey, something recent has happened, because otherwise you would have expected it, like nature, to kind of have worn away at it.
Yeah, and recent is that's one of those words that's hard to define, but it's something that hasn't, geologically speaking, it's recent. So I'd estimate, last 5 to 6 years if you've got pieces of spalling that you can still pull out. And then the thickness of the crack is something to consider. If it's a hairline crack in new construction, it's generally a curing crack, which means that they poured the concrete too quickly and didn't allow it to dry. And so it's just cracking. Shouldn't progress much further than the crack that it already is, but it just looks ugly. And then the thicker, more than a centimeter thick cracks indicate movement at some point or settling damage. So those are things to look at. People freak out about our vertical cracks, but if you're in a home in Tacoma that's 100 years old, it's had 100 years to move. So it's a matter of figuring out whether it's expected damage or unexpected damage. Or you can have damage like this foundation that I did for an investor. This is a walkout basement, and the home's about 110 years old, and it's got this nice V-shaped crack in it. And that's a major foundation failure. It's moving down, it's moving to the right of that picture, and it's causing all kinds of damage. Hang on just a second. So this is this middle picture, this is a total foundation failure, even on a 110-year-old home. And we're always going to recommend further evaluation by a structural engineer for something like this. So if you see these V-shaped cracks, or if you see cracks that they're on each side of a corner of a house, that's a foundation crack that's significant and is causing the house to sink quicker and is total foundation failure, and we'll always call that out. That means that all the weight of the house is settling to one corner of the house, and that needs to be repaired. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Maybe a question before I forget. Is the recency of the crack, is recent good or bad?
Recent.
Like, is it better that it's recent, or is it worse that it's recent?
That's it depends on the house. If it's a 110-year-old house and we have recent movement, we've got a lot to be concerned about. If it's a brand new house, recent movement, I mean, you'd have to, it's all a long equation, right? So if it's recent, new house, and if the crack is significant, then we've got some massive problems. If it's that big of a deal. Houses, okay. I like to say, as soon as the house is built, it starts falling down. We just need to know whether it's falling down faster than it was intended to, or in line with what it was intended to.
Awesome.
Brick foundations, like this third picture, brick and CMU or concrete block foundations often have cracking at the mortar, which is a very expected.
Hey Troy, I'm hearing some like feedback. I think it's on your microphone. Maybe you're hitting it on your shirt.
All right, how's that?
Yeah, I think it's better. Oh, we got some noise actually on Karen's end. Karen, I'm gonna mute you.
Cool.
See if that helps. Oh, there we go.
Cool. All right. So concrete block foundations, they crack along the mortar lines, and that's expected, and oftentimes just needs to be repointed, more mortar poured. And then, but if it's cracking in the middle of a brick, that's a bigger concern, and likely that brick needs to be replaced because there's a lot of weight in that section. So that's a little difference between the expected and unexpected damage. And then this image here is Gideon's favorite thing. The horizontal cracks are way more significant than the vertical cracks, just because you've got soil and water that's pushing that foundation in directions that it's not supposed to go. And that's gonna cause a lot more damage. In the future, and be much more expensive to fix. You can see that they've had to put anchors into the wall here to hold it back. So, and
is that sufficient? Like, can you just do that and we get it, or is it like it's going to become a problem again?
I mean, you've got to do a whole evaluation. If you just put anchors in, that doesn't solve the problem, right? You've got to do the drainage, and you've got to fix the soil around it. That's where the French drains come in, to make sure that you don't have that water pressing against the foundation. The bigger problem is when the water is pressing up into the slab, because you can't put a French drain underneath there. You can dig down and do a sump pump, which will help, but you can't actually solve the problem because that means you've got a low water table, and you're just going to be fighting it forever.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Oh, go ahead.
Does anybody have any questions, by the way? Kind of a natural break point. Okay. Cool. Just want to give everybody the opportunity. Oh.
Yeah. Hi, this is Karen.
Hey, Karen.
Hey, yeah. So when we have an inspection and we're noticing that there's some serious foundation issues, and we just we just got a contract. I mean, at what point do we make the decision to release the contract and let go of control of the property?
That is a great question. So it depends on the client and their needs, because someone who's planning on raising kids in a house is different than a military family that's just going to live there for 5 years. Is different than an investor who's going to hold it for 10 years to send their kids through college.
Right.
So it's really an individual thing, but I try, and the difference between retail and investors is huge. Some investors can do foundation work for half the price that you would do for retail. If you use Matt Gay, it's going to cost you, twice as much if you use your GC, who can just, pour some concrete, right?
Right.
So it depends, but you start. If you see a corner of a house and there's significant cracks on each side, they're thick cracks. That's major foundation failure. If you see that one, let's see, can I go back? If you see like that V-shaped crack, that's a major problem. And so you've got to, as an agent, it's best for you to know the situation that your clients are in and know if they've got money or the time or what their time frame is, and whether it's something that's going to be concerning to them.
But then it would be up to us to come up with the numbers. And say I don't have a GC in my pocket, or a foundation guy ready to give me some quotes. I mean,
Sure.
what am I talking about?
Sure. So a lot of times, most of the foundation problems can be just solved with some filler, some cracks like the first picture that we've got here, just some filler. Anything major, you're looking at, depending upon what they need to do, you're looking at $5,000 to $15,000, depending upon whether they've got to jack things up, and then if they've got to put in anchors like this right hand picture, you're talking $25,000, because they've got to engineer and pull permits and all kinds of stuff.
And we're presuming that the seller has disclosed this, or do we want to negotiate that away somehow?
Yeah, foundation cracks are great negotiation tools, especially when you're working with an investor, because a seller is going to be afraid they're going to hear foundation problems. In fact, I did an inspection yesterday, and there were some pretty major foundation problems, and called the buyer up, and she heard foundation problems, and she said, okay, well, we're going to back out. And it's like, well, but you could get it fixed for like 20 grand, and then the house is going to last for another 100 years. But
right,
you could probably get it. Hers was not something you could get done easy, or do something a little bit different to buttress up the foundation. But foundations are scary things, but sometimes the fixes are cheaper than putting on a new roof.
Wow, thank you. That's a great answer.
Cool.
Awesome. Anyone else have questions? Feel free to jump in too. But yeah, Troy, feel free to continue.
Cool. Electrical panels. Hopefully you all know that an FPE, Federal Pacific electrical panel, is probably considered one of the unsafest panels that is still out there. We've got a lot of them down in Kent, the Urian area. Puyallup got a lot of them. They're everywhere. They almost were recalled by the Consumer Protection Agency, but they weren't.
Wow.
So if you see one, 98.5% of inspectors are going to call it out for replacement. And you might have problems with insurance if you're going through FHA or VA or USDA if Federal Pacific's seen on a appraisal report or inspection report. So be aware of that. And just panel replacement runs about $3,000 depending on where you are. It can be cheaper down further south, but in Seattle you're looking $3,000 to $4,000 for a panel replacement. So we've got this FPE Federal Pacific. We've got the Zinsco panel, and then we've got these fuse boxes. There's still some fuse boxes around. All of these things are safety issues in modern homes. Oftentimes, coupled with these, you'll find things like knob and tube wiring. You'll find things like aluminum wiring, ungrounded, ungrounded Romex stuff in the house, and all that stuff can be a fire hazard. And so sometimes my reports always state that electrical should be replaced because I believe that if you're going to change the panel, you should change all the electrical at the same time. It's all one system, and fixing one component doesn't fix the system. And
wow,
then
so
there's
that's a pretty big one either way then. So you're saying if the panel needs to be replaced, you need to replace all the electrical?
Well, my reports say that you should. Whether or not a home buyer does that is up to them. The panel is a problem, but if we don't evaluate the rest of the system, what damage has that panel caused? Right. In these FPE and Zinsco and fuse boxes, there's no ground to draw out any of the bad electrical breaks. So it's causing damage to all the wiring inside the walls. So that's why I look at, the knob and tube and the aluminum wiring. Those are automatic replacement issues also. So it's
and is that what you're showing here? That aluminum?
Yeah, well, you're not going to be able to identify aluminum unless you take off the panel, or you can see some exposed wires, and that's just the silver wire, non-braided silver wire that goes to the outlets and light fixtures. It's actually aluminum, but it looks silver, right? So there's no way to identify it. Usually, if you see the two-pronged outlets, that's a great indication that you've got older wiring. And then it's just a matter of determining whether it was knob and tube, the ungrounded two-wire circuits, or aluminum wiring.
Can you tell us about knob and tube a bit? One of those words that people hear a lot.
Yeah, so knob and tubes, if you've got a walkout basement or you pop your head into the attic, you might see these white porcelain cylinders that are spaced on the joists or the rafters with a wire running through it. So the wiring's actually like a ceramic wiring, which is where we get our tube from, and then the wires are in that ceramic tube. And then the knob is the ceramic hanger that everything's hung on. The problem with the knob and tube system is that it generates heat, and there's no insulation other than the ceramic tubing, and the tubing, the ceramics aren't a great insulator, so it can cause fire damage. And we often see in houses in Seattle and Tacoma that someone's come through and insulated. They've done blown-in insulation over the knob and tube wiring, and that's a major safety concern unless the insulation's rated to be protected against the knob and tube. There's a special NEC code that deals with that. So you'd have to find the insulator and check to make sure that it's the right stuff, and can be a big problem.
Gotcha. So people have already, I mean, it's in the house already, and I think in most houses are not, you know, never catch fire or something from these things. To what extent are people okay just using this? Or is it the kind of thing where you're not going to be able to get a loan on them anymore?
I think we're headed that way. It's just so ubiquitous across the country that there's not a lot of, there's some places, Florida, North Carolina, they're not insuring houses that have got knob and, there's some insurance companies that aren't insuring houses because of the knob and tube and these panels. So it's starting to come, but you know, just because there's been a landmine buried underneath the ground for 50 years doesn't mean it's not going to go off tomorrow.
All right.
Right? I mean, just because the last time you pulled the gun, the trigger on the gun, and nothing came out doesn't mean it's not going to come out this time. And the other problem is the systems just aren't, they're not strong enough to handle modern day appliances. That's why you're upgrading to 200 amps. You know, you've got to, if you're going to have a 100 amp Zinsco breaker box, you better have a gas stove, a gas water heater, a gas furnace. All your appliances need to be gas and not electric based, or when you turn on a light, when you've got the TV on, you're going to see the lights dim because you're pulling too much amperage. So, you know, that's a concern. And then just the way that these Zinsco and FPEs were built are faulty. It's called a split bus system, and the split buses can arc and cause fires in the boxes. So, and then there's one that people aren't very familiar with, but we see them. It's the Challenger brand boxes. They follow this Zinsco FPE manufacturing chain. They're all manufactured by different manufacturers as they went out of business, but they kept building the same split bus breaker panels up until the Challenger in the mid 90s. So these three are obvious. Almost everyone knows that they're unsafe and that they're going to be called on an inspection, but it's this Challenger that people aren't quite aware of, that not all of them are split bus, so you do have to evaluate, you do have to pull off the panel to determine if it is a split bus Challenger. Questions on electrical?
Angelique just perpetually has her hand. That hand raised. Sorry, go on, Karen.
Oh, I didn't raise my hand, so okay, so.
Oh, I lost her.
Oh,
Yes,
Karen?
oh, yeah, I'm back. So my issue is I had a box in a closet. So those can't be in closets anymore?
Yeah, and who called that out? Was that an inspector or the appraiser?
The appraiser.
Yeah, appraisers are idiots.
It's California, Northern California.
Oh,
I mean, but then also I had a GC that said that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so the problem is building codes change over time.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it was likely built to code. Someone calling it out because it's not up to current code and sinking a deal, that's ridiculous, because most municipalities have grandfathering regulations. So if it was built
Yes.
into the closet, it should be okay. It's not any
Awesome.
more unsafe. But if you are doing a rehab and upgrading it, it should be moved. If you touch the box, the permit says that you probably have to move it.
Oh, the box needed to be touched because there's no ground.
Oh, yeah, well, that's where you make the decision on whether, is it worth it? Because then we have to move it. We got to pull all the electrical.
Right.
But if you've got to move, yeah, then you'd have to move it. But if you just leave it, it shouldn't. If it hasn't been touched, it shouldn't be a problem. But if you do have to touch it, then you probably have to bring it up to code.
So in that case, it has to be like outside on a wall. Like it's so ugly now, right? It can't be hidden.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you can, basements. You can even put it on the exterior of the house if you're worried about the interior look. There are a lot of panels that are rated for exterior service, so that would be something to consider. And with current code, you need to have 3 feet access in front of it to work on it. So that's going to restrict a lot of places that you can move it to, and where the line is, and all those other things. So yes, if you're trying to sell a house, maybe you just and it's in a bad place, people like to hang picture frames over it and posters over it. As long as you can easily move it, it shouldn't be a problem. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, I said thank you.
Oh, cool, great. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I was muted myself. I was saying that that's my fault. I muted her because there was some background noise.
Oh, cool.
So you're good to go.
Yes, and I said thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks. All right, cool. All right. Oil tanks. As we know, oil tanks can be a problem. They can be expensive, and in some places like Seattle, they often have to be, if they're still there, they need to be decommissioned or pulled out of the ground. So here are a couple. If you see a short stubby pipe that's been capped off, usually an indication of an oil tank. They've cut down the hook. If you find a little pipe that's got a twist off lid, that's your fill valve. If you see this hook shaped vent cover, that's a sign that there was an oil tank. And usually if it's still got the hook on it, that means that it wasn't properly decommissioned. They would have cut that pipe down and capped it. But if it still has a vent, that means they're still trying to vent all the air out of there. And then in the basement, if you've got a walkout basement, if you see these two tiny little copper tubes that are coming out of the wall, usually an indication that there was an oil tank in the ground. And it may be gone, but without doing some exploratory digging or a metal detector, there's not, most inspectors aren't equipped to try and locate oil tanks. You just have to be aware that if you see one of these 4 signs, that you likely have an oil tank likely had or have an oil tank on the property.
And knowing that we have an oil tank or not having an oil tank, what should like an investor or anyone in general be thinking about? Is it an issue that's one thing? Do they have to all be decommissioned each time, or
In Seattle, they have.
there could be different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's not in use in Seattle, currently in use in Seattle, it's got to be decommissioned. Just the likelihood of them leaking and having polluted some of the soil around is a big deal, and that's why the city of Seattle and other municipalities are worried about it and require the decommissioning at the sale of a home that's got a tank. Or you could make sure that it still works, fill it up, and use an oil furnace, and then you're good to go. Except most people hate having oil furnaces these days, so because it's so expensive, even though it's pretty efficient and one of the best heating sources, but it is expensive. And oftentimes people will say they don't know that if there's an oil tank, but here are your signs to find them. Windows. Another thing you can see as you're walking around showing off the house. Aluminum windows are terrible. If you see an aluminum window, it likely needs to be replaced. They just attract so much moisture, and people don't clean them or maintain them, and they can cause massive wall damage like the picture here. Aluminum windows, if someone's when someone changes the windows, they change what's called the energy envelope of the house. The house is built around this science to insulate the house, keep air in certain sections and air out of certain sections. If you put new insulation in the attic, you change that energy envelope and you drive all this moisture to the windows, and that'll cause damage. And then if you upgrade aluminum windows to vinyl windows, you do the same thing, but you drive it into the attic space. Or if you add underfloor insulation, or you change the thickness of you go from lath and plaster walls to adding drywall, you're changing the insulation value of the building, and you're driving the moisture out of the places where it was designed to be into places that it's not designed to be. And that usually means the crappy aluminum windows. And then you get expensive, you have to open up walls and fix the framing, and could damage the siding and all those good things. So aluminum windows are usually they usually have hidden damage. There's usually framing damage. So if you see them, just expect that an inspector is going to call out some hidden damage or moisture damage around those things. And then always remember your egress codes when you're walking around. You don't want to, a home might be listed as a 5-bedroom, but the 5th bedroom's non-conforming because it doesn't have egress code, and then your appraiser discounts the value of the home because you don't have the egress code. You don't have that egress window in that bedroom, and so now it's a 4-bedroom and an office instead of 5-bedroom home. And the most important thing on here, usually the easiest one to catch, is the height from the ground. If it's in the basement, usually you have to cut like a window well to get to the 36 inches off the ground for egress, or 44 inches off the ground for egress. And then the clear opening size is also important, but usually most windows are big enough in a bedroom setting for that. So aluminum windows bad. Egress code is important for an agent to know so that they don't get surprised at an appraisal. Any questions about windows?
Yeah, I didn't understand what you meant. Egress code, I mean, it has to be big enough for somebody to get out of the window and low enough for somebody to reach it. Is that what that's about?
Yes. So
the 36. Yeah. Go ahead.
So it's got to be. Let me see. Let me see if I can get rid of this window here. No. All right. So yeah. So it's the 44 inches to the sill height. Is from the ground. So a child has to be able to grasp the sill and pull themselves up, and then the clearing needs to be big enough for a bigger person to wiggle out of. So you need that 5.7, at minimum 5.7 square feet clear openings and minimum 20-inch width and minimum 41-inch height. Most windows are manufactured to that. And now if you're installing windows, the basement windows are gonna be the proper size.
So that's a national fire code?
Yes, national building, IRC.
Troy, it goes the other way too. We've got ones where it's too low to the ground. That can be a problem as well. At least I've had that one. Can you, anything special about that besides just you don't want a kid to fall out?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there are places where it's on a second floor or something. If it's more than the 40, if it's less than the 44 inches, then it should be. You don't have to move the window frame. You just need to have safety glass installed, so that if something cracks into it, it doesn't give out and people don't fall out of it. Right. So, and that's around at the bottom of stairs, second floor, windows. Yeah.
And as an alternative to safety glass, couldn't we put in some decorative sort of bars?
You can't put
low bar.
You can't put bars over egress unless it's got quick release mechanisms. It'll keep someone falling out, but if you don't have that safety glass, it's going to be sharp, and when it breaks, it can cut open an artery or something. So the safety glass is a much better solution than putting bars on a window.
Thank
you.
Yeah. What's so safety glass? You're saying it's hard to break in.
Mm-hmm. It's harder to break, and when it breaks into the small little round non-sharp pieces.
Well, I had a house. I still do have a house. It's a rental where there is a basement bedroom, and there were bars in front. And Section 8 told me to remove them. But there was also some concerns with the tenant that it wasn't a safe neighborhood, and they didn't want people to break in. Is that something that the glass you're talking about can help with, or any recommendations there? Like, can the quick release help with that?
Yeah, I mean, we had this problem in Vegas with our rentals, is that all of our properties had bars on the windows, and we had to install quick release mechanisms so that you just have to pull a lever real quick to pop open the window, the bars.
From the inside?
Yeah, from the inside. So if there's a fire, you're not trapped inside the death house.
Cool.
Yeah.
This is great, by the way.
Thanks. Fireplaces.
Awesome.
Fireplaces are terrible things. Tear them all out. So this picture here on the left, very typical older house. It's an unlined chimney, which means there's no metal lining around the bricks and the CMUs or what have you. big terrible thing. You can see that there's some growth in some of the mortar. So with that, you're going to get sparks that are going to fly up, could cause damage. There could be holes in the mortar, and you could get carbon monoxide leaking out. So an unlined fireplace is always going to be called out, assuming the inspector pokes his head down there, because it is a fire hazard and it is a safety hazard, and a liner should be installed. And liners can be expensive. Sometimes it's better to, instead of doing a liner, sometimes it's better to just put in a gas fireplace or a wood prefab and do a V-vent through the chimney instead of lining the chimney itself. Probably cheaper and more attractive to upgrade the look of the house. Gas fireplaces, most people don't realize that gas fireplaces are an appliance and therefore have an average lifespan. They have a 10 to 15 year lifespan and they start going bad. So those are things to be aware of. You can see in this picture that we've got the foggy glass, etched glass, which indicates that there's moisture in the gas fireplace, which is not properly ventilating, which means there could be other problems. So you'd have to do smoke tests and air tests to make sure that you're not getting carbon monoxide in from the faulty gas fireplace. And then it's always kind of hard to see, but if you look inside the firebox, and you can see sometimes the damaged mortar, that's especially terrible because it's just holding all the carbon monoxide from the burning wood. And then when you put out the fire, it's going to drift back into the house and can cause carbon monoxide poisoning and all that nasty stuff. So best solution is to put in new inserts. Just do a full insert. You can get a modern look, couple $1,000s. It's gonna be safer and better than these brick built chimneys, and it's gonna provide you a longer longer working thing than these old chimneys. And in some cases, it might be worthwhile to knock a chimney down to add some living space or improve the exterior look. And if you're in California, there's a whole lot of different codes with chimneys, and whether it's pulling away from the house or how you secure it because of earthquakes and all that good stuff. Questions on fireplaces and chimneys?
Hey, yeah, this is Karen again. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the earthquake thing.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are codes, but again, I mean, if it was built to code, how do you know when you're ready to secure a chimney?
Yeah. So I mean, a chimney is. Chimney.
I mean, the house I just sold had a great chimney. It's fine. The fireplace works. We can use it. It's not
right
a problem.
So
it's
in California, because of the frequency of earthquakes, they've got a lot more codes when it comes to chimneys. And with the Bay Area that I'm familiar with, the fire department comes out every year and checks roofs and chimneys to make sure that they're not earthquake hazards or fire hazards.
Oh, right, yes.
I'm not sure where in California you are, if that's a thing in your part of California, but if that's the case, then hopefully you've got that annual inspection. And chimneys should be inspected and cleaned every year. So you could ask the seller for their last chimney inspection and see if there are any things noted on that for you to consider as you're purchasing.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for making that statement, because that's critical. So then, so the fire inspector comes annually, and they're really looking to make sure that you're clearing around your property for fire hazards.
Yeah.
So I guess as part of that, they're looking at the chimney, and they'd leave you with a report. So that's so we should also ask for that last report as well, right?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, and if they're like most people, they just throw it away, you can probably call the fire department, the local fire department, and get a copy of it.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised when I was living in California and the fire marshal showed up. I was like, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I'm here to look at you." I'm like, "Well, if we lived in the redwoods," so I was like, "Well, if it goes up, there's not a whole lot to do."
Right. Right. It's like it's a tinderbox up there.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah.
Um,
and PG&E should have been clearing that stuff, but that's another conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right. One of the big questions that agents always have is whether tenants or homeowners should be at an inspection, the seller or the seller's tenants. The homeowner being there is a terrible idea. Never allow a homeowner to be there. If it is currently occupied, the inspection's not going to be as thorough because, at least in Washington State, there's a lot of rules and regulations on what we can do with residents and tenants' belongings, and we can't often move things. So it is going to be more difficult in an occupied house to do a thorough inspection, but we should be able to find most of the problems. Just don't let a homeowner be there. But if you do have tenants, if it's a rental property and you do have tenants, never say no to tenants being there, because they're going to rag on the property as hard as anyone else can. They've been living there, they know all the problems, they've seen all the things, and they're going to tell you everything. And I've got a couple agents who are great about just, hey, if you bought this, if you had 3 things to change in this home, what would they be? And then they get started and they just tell you all of the problems, when the last thing was fixed, how long the leak's been going on, and you just get a wealth of information from tenants. Homeowners are just going to argue about everything. Oh no, it's not that bad. So tenants, yes. Homeowners, no. You're going to get a better inspection with tenants because they're going to tell you more about the property. Questions about who should be there?
It's a great tip.
Yeah, I'm always surprised by how often tenants just tell me absolutely everything, and homeowners are tight-lipped. I think that's it. I think that's everything I got.
Amazing. This was great. I am very excited to share this out with everybody. Does anybody have any questions for Troy before we wrap up? He's got his contact information on the slides, and we've got it in the Facebook group too, and in the email. So yeah, feel free to, if you're watching this video later and you want to chat with Troy, go ahead and reach out. Troy, any extra instructions there?
Yeah, it's best to text me on this 425-689-5344. That goes to the whole company. And if you're one of those people who are used to Facebook messaging me, stop doing that. I've got other inspectors, and it can get lost if it doesn't go to all the work contact information. So I put down the new appointments email address down there, appointments at Lonika HIS. That way it goes into our system and we all get notified of it. And it's easier to keep everything organized as we continue to grow.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Troy. Really appreciate your time. I've hired Troy before, so I recommend him. And as you saw, this is great, really great content. I learned so many things. So thank you, Troy.
Cool, not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you.
right,
I learned a lot too.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Me too. It's great.
You're welcome. Great.
All right, have a great day.
Next time I'll try and have it so you can get CEUs with the video. We'll get that
What's
figured
that?
out. Next time I'll be able to get you guys continuing education units.
Awesome.
Oh, that's great. That'd be definitely more informative than a lot of continuing education.
Right. I'm working on it.
Really?
Yep.
Yay.
All right.
Okay.
So we'll
All
see
right.
you guys next time.
All right.
Bye-bye.